I'm Denise, I'm the Scottish one.
And she's a non-fiction editor. And I'm Louise, the English one.
And she's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Season 4 of the Editing Podcast. It's great to be back.
It really is. It feels like it's been ages.
It does.
Yeah. So let's dig right in. Tell everyone what we're talking about this week, Louise.
It's the Grammar Police. The Grammar Police. Who they are, why they're nothing to do with professional editing, and how to manage an assault from one of them. Now, Denise, you wrote an amazing blog post about this a few years ago.
God, yeah, way back in 2016 or something like that.
Yeah, and it got well over 700 shares, which tells us something. It struck a chord, not only with other editors, but with writers too.
Yeah, it really did. And it fits in really nicely with the discussion we had with Rob Drummond, our linguist guest, who came on the podcast in Season 3.
Right. So something that writers fear is if they put their work in an editor's hands, they're going to be at the mercy of the so-called grammar police. And that's awful, because that's absolutely not what should be going on.
It's really not at all. Though we all know the grammar police, we've all been under their cosh at one time or another, whether we're editing or writing. And in case any listeners out there don't know who I'm talking about, lucky you, it's those people who delight in jumping on anyone who dares to commit a so-called error of grammar or language use, and then calling them out on it loudly and publicly.
Particularly on social media. I mean, God forbid that your fingers mistype something on Twitter because you're holding a mobile phone while frying chips and arguing with your toddler. Not that I'm advocating frying chips, arguing with a child and tweeting at the same time, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And sometimes I just make mistakes because it's like, Twitter or Facebook. Either I'm in conversation with someone or I'm sharing something for free. So give me a break.
Exactly, yeah. And that's even before autocorrect's done its thing.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the things that are often called out, if they're not accidental errors, and I'm thinking here about on blog posts, transcripts, that kind of thing, they're more often than not, they're issues of style or preference rather than actual rules. Yeah. And I suspect that the issues that get lots of people jumpy online, they're the actual things that are outdated or were never rules in the first place. They were style choices made by someone's English teacher, or more likely their teacher's teacher, which they're desperately clinging on to in the face of changing usage.
Yeah, like singular they, the serial comma, try, and versus try to. I find it hard to believe that these things are still even being called out as part of some shaming exercise. But even a spelling mistake, come on, so what? And the thing is that online communication and the kind of the kind of informal writing style that you'll see in creative non-fic and in fiction, particularly dialogue, respects voice and all the wonderful idiomatic variances that come with speech.
Yeah.
So, there's no rule. There's no rules.
No.
Well, sometimes there are rules, but
much less often than people actually realise. Yeah. And that's why behaving like you're a member of the grammar police is a bad thing. And it's
BAD.
Why writers shouldn't worry. Capital BAD, yeah. And writers should not worry that their editor is going to be overly prescriptive, unless, of course, you ask us to be.
Right, well, that's a good point, and I think we ought to take a minute just to focus on that, because in your line of work, Denise, non-fiction, you're dealing with business and academic texts. So are there times when you will be prescriptive or more prescriptive? Because when I'm dealing with, when I'm editing fiction for indie authors, I use style manuals as a guide, but my approach is very fluid, and I'm more than happy to ignore, for example, Chicago's recommendations on something if I think it just works better for the story to do so.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely times when I'm much more likely to adhere to a set of given style preferences. For example, if I'm copy-editing an article for an educational journal, that journal will probably, quite rightly, have strict guidelines for how numbers, tables and figures should be rendered. But it might also insist on things like avoiding passive voice. It might decide that data should be plural, or that singular they should be used, or that the serial comma should only be used when absolutely necessary. None of these are absolute rules, and article authors have consented to stick by that given style as part of their publishing agreement. So I am going to be more pedantic in that case because I'm working on behalf of the publisher to their style.
Yeah. And so it's pedantry with purpose, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's why it's different. It's not just for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm.
So prescriptivism is very much about context. Language isn't chiseled in stone, it's a living thing, and that's okay. We don't write like Chaucer or Shakespeare anymore. We don't speak like the BBC presenters of the 1950s. I don't think that's a very good impression.
I certainly don't speak like that anyway.
No, I don't think you ever did.
Never.
Or anyone in your family ever did. Well, so context is everything, and we adapt the formality, and as editors, we adapt the formality and pay attention to accuracy depending on our target reader. So just because somebody writes a certain way on social media, that doesn't reflect some assumed level of capability in terms of literacy either.
Absolutely.
But the other thing is, it's just plain rude to call people out in public, even if they have used non-standard spelling or punctuation and they don't realize it is non-standard. It's just rude.
It's abso-bloomin'-lutely. I would even swear about that, but I'm not going to. Yeah. And I'm really glad that you said non-standard rather than wrong, because that's what nails it. We are just talking about standards, conventions and guidelines when it comes to written English. So if you've benefited from an education that taught you formal standard grammar and you don't have to wrestle with a learning difference such as dyslexia, you should be thankful and you should be gracious. Just let it go. There must be more important things anyone could be doing in their life than spell checking someone's Facebook posts.
You mean like frying chips and arguing with a toddler? I'm joking! Now, what do we do when we see errors in an article or book? Calling out in public is a no-no, always. But what about private messages? What do you think?
Well, I think if you see a really obvious error in someone's blog post or web copy and you think it'll help them to fix it, I think it's collegial to send them a private message. Private message. Yeah. Private. But frame it right. Let them know that you're enjoying reading it, but you've noticed this or that mistake and thought they might like to correct it. If you're sure it is a mistake as well, that's the other thing. And then you've done it. Job done. No public embarrassment caused. Yeah? Now, there's something related to this that does come up in editor forums now and again, and that's about contacting publishers if you notice a mistake in a book. You've worked in-house, Louise. What do you think about this as a tactic? Does it come across as a bit too grammar policey?
That's a good question. So, regardless of I don't think for me it's a grammar police issue. I think it's more of a sort of practical point of view. So my view on this is that the book's already published, so you're telling them about something that can't be fixed. Well, not in the print version anyway. And yes, because I've worked in-house, I've seen how busy everyone is trying to get new books out to market without then having to worry about teeny-weeny slip-ups and stuff that's already been put to bed.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about some howling error on the front cover. Obviously that's I mean, thousands of people, millions of people are going to notice that. So talking about the odd wee typo here and there, I just don't think that that's the way to approach it.
Yeah. Though if it were web copy, it's something that they can change easily. That's a different story because it's fixable. It's that context thing again. But if you're an editor who wants to get on a publisher's radar, why not just send them an email telling them who you are and what you can do for them? That's a neutral approach that won't offend anyone.
Absolutely. Go to them with solutions, your editorial abilities, not problems that they can't easily solve.
Yeah.
And thinking about writers' concerns again for a moment, I think all writers should feel free to ask for a particular style points to be adhered to. I actually include a form on my website that authors can fill in once we've agreed to work together, and they can tell me if there's something they don't or do want me to do. So if a semicolon is banned, for example, or if a particular character's title must be rendered in a certain way, or if they want me to look out for any little stylistic tick that they're trying to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and that's a really sensible idea, because then you know them from the beginning rather than having to go back and you've maybe made changes that they don't want on these particular issues that you need to go back and sort out again. Yeah, I've got the same approach with creative non-fiction. I'm not going to slavishly drop 0 commas into a book just because it's, and I'm doing air quotes here, standard, unless the author insists on it. And good editors might well try to defend a stylistic decision, but only if they think that your work might be perceived negatively by readers. But at the end of the day, it's the writer's call.
Yep. I end every editorial report with a reminder to the author, it's your book and you can accept, reject or tweak any of my edits or suggestions as you see fit. Because a lot of the time it is subjective. It's
Yeah.
not me being the grammar police and imposing decisions on a piece of writing because of my own preferences. At least I hope that doesn't happen. That
Yeah.
subjectivity thing does come into play, and I think one of the hardest things about being a pro editor is making sure you really are improving the text rather than inputting preferences. It's something I think we all have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I do think that that can change the more experience you get. I think the better you get at distancing yourself from it and
Yeah,
saying, this is not my writing, and the way it's written is good enough, and it's the author's choice for it to be like that.
yeah,
If I was
yeah,
writing it, I might write it differently, but I'm not, so I'm
yeah,
going to leave it as it is. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So, shall we have a quick chat about how to deal with the grammar police when you encounter them? And this
Yes.
goes for writers and editors. So, the first thing is, don't engage with them on the mistake or the non standard variant that they're pulling you up on.
And the reason for that is that it's just a distraction away from whatever you were talking about and a move towards a rabbit hole from which the grammar police will not let you climb out. They
Yeah.
want you in there so that they can stand at the edge and throw stones at you. It's like that George Bernard Shaw quote that goes something like, "Don't wrestle with a pig, you'll get dirty, and beside the pig likes it." And that's it. There's
Yeah.
just don't.
That's it, yeah, yeah. And I know how hard it can be not to respond when you feel like you're under attack in a public space. We were talking about this before we started recording, weren't we? And we've both been subjected to it at times in our editing career. And because editors and writers work with words, I think there is an additional pressure on us to get it right everywhere, every
Yeah.
time. And
Sometimes that's pressure just from ourselves. And
well, exactly,
um,
yes, yeah, yeah. But it's just humanly impossible. Mistakes happen, yeah.
yeah,
But if you feel tempted to respond, think about all the nice things you could do for that 10 minutes that it's going to take you to stop seething and craft a public response to the attack. And then the additional hour you'll spend when that person comes back at you again. So
yeah.
maybe you could spend some time, I don't know, outlining your new book or checking the references in the article you've written, or, of course, our favourite Louise, grabbing yourself a glass of your favourite tipple. Yes.
Absolutely. Or if you're still online, respond to a commenter who's way more interesting than Wing Commander typo. That way you just shut the grammar police down. Social media feeds are so noisy and fast that they'll disappear in a flash. And that reminds me of one other thing. Online discussion spaces work on algorithms that prioritize posts that are getting engagement. And so when we
Yeah.
respond to the grammar police, we're essentially telling the algorithms to reward the negative comment, and we're helping it get more eyes on it.
Do you know, that's a really good point, and I think it's one that is just really easy to forget, that by feeding the trolls you are rewarding them and making
Yeah,
them much, much more visible. Yeah.
yeah,
And that's a technical as well as psychological benefit for the snarker. So don't
yeah.
hand that power over to them. And one more thing you can do is to remind yourself that they're the one with no social skills, and they, not you, are the one who looks like a bit of an idiot.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Right. Now we've sorted that out.
Yes.
It's time for Editing Bites, the regular bit of the show where we each recommend a favourite resource that we think you'll find useful. So mine is a little tool that our friend and editing colleague Janet McMillan kept nudging me to buy for several years, I think. And I don't know why I never got round to it until recently, but now that I have, it's saving me oodles of time.
Oh.
It's called TextExpander. So basically, for a few quid a month, you can store snippets of text with links if you want, and assign shortcut keys to them. Then, when you want that text, and you don't have to type it again over and over and over. So it's really handy for writers and editors who are repeatedly typing similar notes, queries, addresses, emails, and URLs into documents or into a website. In fact, I love it at the end of every blog post I write. I always have a bio at the end,
Yeah.
and I've now popped that into TextExpander, and so I just type a couple of letters, and the whole bio just slips into Weebly,
It's brilliant.
and expands into the box I've created, rather
Yeah.
than me having to even go and copy and paste it from a
Yeah.
document. It's so much quicker.
Because it works across different platforms, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
just in Word. It works on email. It works on I think it works on online forms, all sorts of things. Really clever little tool.
Yeah, I still don't have a copy of it. It's on my list. I know. I know.
You need to get it. I think it's only about £4 a month.
It's really, I mean, it's a no-brainer actually, and
Yeah.
so many of our editor colleagues, you included obviously, they rave about it, and
Yeah.
like you, I've just been hearing about it for years and just not got around to it. So yes, I shall add that to my to-do list.
On your to-do list.
Yeah. So my bite is, if you're interested in learning up-to-date information on grammar and language use, my bite is the Blue Book of Grammar and Punctuation by Jane Straus. Now, this is a grammar guide and workbook for American English. I think that's important to point out. And I learned about it in an international editors forum. It's a lovely, clear format with handy quizzes to test your understanding. So if you're writing in American English, this is a good one for you.
Great. So that's it for this week. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Editing Podcast. It's great to be back. You can rate, review and subscribe to us via Apple Podcasts, Spotify or whichever platform you prefer.
And we've put all the links we've mentioned in the show notes so you can grab everything there. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.